Have you ever walked into a room and felt something shift instantly, even though no one spoke? No announcement, no explanation. Yet the air felt different. Some people carry that effect. They don't persuade, they don't perform. They arrive, and reality adjusts. This isn't confidence, it isn't charisma, and it's not silence as withdrawal. It's presence, a kind of attention so steady that it changes how everything around it behaves. You felt it before, even if you couldn't name it. What's rarely talked about is why this happens, what these people are doing internally while saying nothing at all, and why reality responds to them in ways it seems to ignore in others. Reality is not deaf. It doesn't need you to explain yourself, justify your intentions, or repeat what you want louder and louder. Reality responds to something far more subtle, the frequency of your consciousness, not your words, not your plans, not even your emotions in the way most people think of them. It responds to the quality of attention you bring into the moment when you are fully here. Think about it carefully. Have you ever walked into a room where nothing obvious was happening, yet you immediately felt tension or calm or openness? No one announced it, no one described it. You simply sensed it. That sensing is already proof that reality is constantly reacting to invisible signals. Your inner state broadcasts before you speak, before you move, before you decide. And reality answers that broadcast with precision. This is where many people get confused. They believe reality changes only when you act on it directly, when you push, convince, demand, or force. But long before action, there is a silent alignment taking place. Your level of presence, your coherence, the way your attention rests or scatters, this is what sets the tone. Reality doesn't respond to effort. It responds to congruence. Physics hints at this, even if the language sounds different. An observed system behaves differently than an unobserved one, not because the observer wants something, but because attention itself is an interaction. Consciousness is not passive. The moment you observe with clarity, something stabilizes. Noise drops, possibilities reorganize. Life feels this shift and adjusts. But this only works when observation is clean, when it's not mixed with anxiety, expectation, or the need to control outcomes. The frequency of consciousness is not about positivity or optimism. It's about depth. A calm, grounded awareness carries more influence than frantic hope ever could. Reality reads stability as a signal of readiness. You've seen this in people who seem to attract opportunities without chasing them. Conversations open, doors unlock, help appears at the right moment. It looks like luck, but it's not random. These people are not broadcasting desperation or resistance. They're present. Their attention is settled. Reality recognizes that state and responds smoothly, the way water responds to a steady riverbed rather than a chaotic flood. This is also why trying too hard often backfires. When consciousness is tense, reality mirrors tension. When awareness is fragmented, outcomes become fragmented. You may say the right words, take the right actions, follow the right strategies, yet something always feels off. That off feeling is the mismatch between what you are doing and what you are being. Presence carries information. Silence carries information. The body carries information. Reality doesn't need instructions. It reads signals. And the strongest signal you can send is undivided attention. When you are truly observing, without rushing to label, judge, or manipulate, you enter a different relationship with life. You stop negotiating with reality and start resonating with it. This is where people underestimate silence. They think silence means absence. In truth, silence is density. It is full of data. When the mind quiets just enough, perception sharpens. You notice patterns, timing, subtle feedback you were blind to before. Reality hasn't changed yet, but your access to it has, and that alone shifts what becomes possible. However, there is a trap hidden here. The moment you hear this, the mind wants to use observation as a tool to get something. It wants to watch in order to control. It wants presence with an agenda. And the moment that happens, the frequency changes again. Observation becomes interference. Attention becomes pressure. Reality feels it immediately. This is the delicate line most people miss. They believe observation is something you do to reality, when in fact it is a way of meeting reality without imposing yourself on it. The power is not in directing the outcome, but in allowing the field of possibilities to rearrange without your interference. That requires trust, patience, and a willingness to not react too quickly. Notice how difficult that is. Notice how quickly the urge to fix, comment, or adjust appears. That urge reveals how addicted the mind is to control. And this is exactly where the next layer begins to unfold. Because the first real mistake people make is not lack of effort, but too much interference. As your awareness starts to stabilize, you may feel an uncomfortable gap opening. A pause between what happens and your impulse to act. That gap is unfamiliar. It feels risky, yet it's precisely there that the structure of reality begins to shift in ways you cannot force. And this is where observation stops being passive and starts becoming transformative, without you needing to say a word. The first mistake almost everyone makes is subtle, and that's why it's so powerful. You don't notice it as an error. It feels like responsibility, like intelligence, like doing what you're supposed to do. The mistake is trying to control what should only be witnessed. From a very early age, you're taught that attention exists to fix things, see a problem, solve it, notice discomfort, eliminate it, detect uncertainty, replace it with certainty. So when you begin to observe your life more closely, the mind automatically assumes control is the goal. It believes awareness is just another tool to manage reality more efficiently. But this is where awareness loses its power. The moment you try to control what you observe, you stop seeing clearly. Observation collapses into reaction, presence turns into tension, and reality, which responds to coherence, now responds to pressure instead. Control feels active, but internally it is rigid. It narrows perception. When you attempt to steer every situation, every emotion, every outcome, your awareness tightens around what you want to happen. You stop noticing what is actually happening. And paradoxically, the more you try to manage reality, the more unpredictable and resistant it becomes. Witnessing is different. Witnessing is not passive, but it is open. When you witness, you allow information to arrive without immediately reshaping it. You don't rush to label it as good or bad, useful or dangerous. You let it exist long enough to reveal its deeper structure. This kind of observation expands perception instead of compressing it. Think about how quickly the mind jumps in. A conversation begins, and before the other person finishes speaking, you're already preparing your response. An emotion arises, and you instantly search for a reason or a solution. A problem appears, and you start forcing an outcome before understanding the situation. In all these moments, observation barely has time to breathe. This urgency to control is not strength, it's fear disguised as competence. The mind fears uncertainty, so it replaces it with action. It fears silence, so it fills it with noise. It fears not knowing, so it pretends to know. And in doing so, it blocks the very intelligence that observation could provide. Reality doesn't respond well to force. It responds to alignment. When you interfere too quickly, you distort the signal. It's like touching the surface of water while trying to see your reflection. The more you move, the less you see. Witnessing requires stillness, not physical stillness, but inner non-interference. This doesn't mean you never act. It means action comes later, and from a different place. When action emerges from witnessing, it is precise. It feels obvious. There's less friction. But when action is rushed, driven by anxiety or control, it multiplies complexity. You end up fixing problems created by your previous attempts to fix things. Most people believe control gives them safety. In reality, it gives them exhaustion. They're constantly monitoring, adjusting, anticipating, correcting. Their attention is fragmented. Their energy leaks everywhere. And because reality mirrors the state of the observer, life begins to feel heavy, resistant, and noisy. Witnessing, on the other hand, consolidates energy. When you stop interfering, attention gathers. You start noticing patterns instead of isolated events. You see timing instead of randomness. You sense when something is ready and when it's not. Reality feels less hostile because you're no longer fighting it. There's another uncomfortable truth here. When you stop trying to control, things don't immediately look better. In fact, they may look messier at first. Emotions feel stronger. Uncertainty becomes more visible. That's because control was suppressing information. Witnessing brings it into the open. This is where many people give up. They assume witnessing is ineffective because it doesn't produce instant relief. So they go back to controlling, managing, forcing. They confuse temporary comfort with real clarity. But if you stay with observation long enough, something shifts. The system reorganizes on its own. And yet, even at this stage, the mind will try to take credit. It will say, now I know how to observe correctly. It will try to turn witnessing into another technique, another strategy, another form of subtle control. This is the trap that leads directly to the next realization. Because between what happens and your impulse to intervene, there is a narrow space most people never enter. A space where perception is free from reaction, where reality has room to show you something new. And learning to remain there without rushing to interfere is where the real doorway begins to appear. There is a space most people never notice, even though they pass through it thousands of times a day. It's not a physical space, it's an inner pause, almost invisible between what happens and what you choose to perceive. Events occur, words are spoken, sensations arise, and then, almost instantly, meaning is assigned. But in that brief interval, before interpretation hardens, something important lives. This space is subtle because it's short. The mind moves fast. It rushes to protect, to explain, to react. It doesn't like gaps. Gaps feel unsafe, so perception usually snaps shut around the first available story. You believe you're seeing reality, but you're mostly seeing conclusions drawn at high speed. Yet when you slow just enough to notice that space, perception changes. You realize that what happens and what you experience are not the same thing. Between them is choice, not the loud, obvious kind of choice, but a quiet one, where attention lands, what it emphasizes, what it ignores. This is not about denial or reframing. It's about allowing the raw data of experience to arrive before turning it into meaning. A tone of voice before the assumption of intent, a bodily sensation before the label of anxiety, a situation before the narrative of success or failure. That pause creates clarity, and clarity changes how reality unfolds next. Most people live as if perception is automatic, as if there is no interval, no flexibility. They believe events directly cause their inner state. But once you notice the space, you see that perception is an active process, even when you're not aware of choosing it. And because it's active, it can soften, widen, or stabilize instead of tightening. This space doesn't feel dramatic. It feels almost boring at first. There's no instant insight, no emotional payoff, just a quiet suspension. And that's exactly why the mind tries to skip over it. The mind wants movement, it wants resolution, it wants certainty. But reality doesn't reveal itself fully under pressure. When you allow that pause to exist, something interesting happens. The intensity of situations drops slightly. Not because problems disappear, but because reactivity loses its grip. You begin to notice that many things you thought were urgent are simply loud, and many things you thought were threatening are just unfamiliar. This changes how you relate to the world. Conversations slow internally, even if they continue externally. You listen more than you prepare your response. You notice what's actually being said, not just what confirms your expectations. That alone alters the entire dynamic. People feel it. Interactions soften or deepen without effort. The same happens internally. Thoughts arise, but instead of being immediately believed, they're seen. Emotions move, but instead of being acted out, they're felt. The space gives you room to be with experience rather than being dragged by it. And in that room, intelligence begins to operate differently. This is where perception stops being a reflex and becomes a relationship. You're no longer at the mercy of every stimulus. You're in dialogue with it. Not through words, but through attention. Reality presents something, and instead of reacting, you receive it. That receiving is not passive, it's precise, it's awake. But this space is fragile. The moment you try to hold on to it, it collapses. The moment you turn it into a technique, it becomes effort. The moment you expect it to produce calm or clarity, the mind takes over again. The space exists only when you don't demand anything from it. This is why so few people stay here. It requires tolerance for ambiguity. It requires staying present without knowing where it will lead. And that feels risky to a mind trained to equate control with survival. So it jumps ahead, fills the gap, and calls it perception. Yet when you remain in that interval, something subtle begins to reorganize. The noise of the world doesn't stop, but it no longer dictates your inner state. You begin to sense when to engage and when to wait, when to speak and when to remain silent. Reality feels less chaotic, not because it changed, but because you're no longer adding to the chaos. And as this space becomes more familiar, another realization emerges. Observation itself starts to quiet the turbulence around you. Situations de-escalate. Conflicts lose momentum. Even without intention, your presence begins to interrupt the automatic patterns of the world. This is where silence stops being empty and starts becoming active. Because when you don't react immediately, when you allow that space to exist, you don't just change your perception, you alter the field around you. And that leads directly into the next shift, where simply observing begins to disrupt the chaos others take for granted. The world runs on momentum. Reactions trigger reactions. Noise feeds noise. Most of what we call chaos is not created by events themselves, but by the speed at which people respond without seeing. Words stack on words. Emotions collide with emotions. Everyone is answering something that was never fully observed in the first place. Total observation breaks that chain. When attention is complete, when it's not split between judgment, defense, and anticipation, something unusual happens. The automatic flow of chaos loses fuel, not because you push against it, but because you stop feeding it. Chaos survives on reactivity. Remove reaction, and its structure weakens. This is difficult to understand until you feel it. Imagine a tense situation where everyone is speaking quickly, interrupting, escalating. Now imagine one person who is fully present, not withdrawn, not passive, simply attentive. They're listening without preparing an argument. They're seeing without labeling. They're aware of their body, their breath, the room. The energy shifts, not dramatically, not instantly, but measurably. The tempo slows, the volume drops. Something settles. That settling is not psychological trickery, it's coherence. When observation is total, inner fragmentation decreases. And because humans are highly responsive to each other's nervous systems, coherence spreads. You don't need authority. You don't need explanations. Presence communicates faster than language. Chaos depends on partial attention. People react to fragments of reality, not the whole. A tone without context, a thought without verification, a feeling without space. Total observation restores the whole picture. It allows things to be seen in relation rather than isolation. And when things are seen in relation, their intensity changes. This is why panic dissolves in the presence of someone grounded. This is why children calm down when they feel truly seen. This is why conflict sometimes evaporates without resolution. Observation reorganizes the field. It interrupts the loop of escalation. But total observation is demanding. It requires staying with discomfort, without rushing to escape it. The mind wants to jump in and fix, explain, or dominate. That impulse is strong because chaos feels threatening. But when you remain present without interference, you discover that chaos often burns itself out when it's no longer resisted or amplified. This doesn't mean doing nothing externally. It means that internally you are not scattered. Your attention is unified. You are not pulled in 10 directions by fear, opinion, and memory. You are here, and here has weight. The world notices this. People may not articulate it, but they feel it. They may say you're calm or intense or hard to read. What they're sensing is not personality, it's absence of noise. Your presence doesn't compete with theirs, it doesn't push, it doesn't collapse, and that creates a new reference point. Chaos is loud because it's unstable. Total observation is quiet because it's stable. And stability has gravity. Things begin to orient around it. Conversations shift. Decisions become clearer. Even your own thoughts start lining up instead of fighting each other. This is where many people misunderstand silence. They think silence is withdrawal or weakness. In reality, Silence with awareness is engagement at a deeper level. You're not escaping the world, you're meeting it without distortion. You're seeing what is, not what fear demands you see. As this becomes more familiar, you'll notice something else. The chaos you used to feel compelled to fix no longer hooks you the same way. You still care, you still respond, but the urgency is gone. You act when action is needed, and you wait when waiting is wiser. Reality stops feeling like an emergency. This shift can be unsettling for others. People are used to feeding off reaction. When you don't provide it, they may feel exposed. Their own noise becomes more obvious. Some will calm down. Others may push harder. This is not your responsibility to manage. Your role is to remain present, not to regulate the world. And yet, without effort, regulation happens. Because total observation doesn't just affect you, it changes how others relate to themselves in your presence. They become more aware or more uncomfortable. Both are signs that something real is happening. As you stay with this, you begin to realize that observation is not neutral. It is participatory. It shapes outcomes by stabilizing the field in which outcomes arise. And the deeper your observation, the less chaos has room to operate. But this is also where a new challenge emerges. The mind doesn't like losing its central role. As observation deepens, internal resistance grows louder, thoughts become sharper, doubts intensify. The system tests you. And this is where observation stops being easy and starts becoming power, because now it has to turn inward. There comes a point when observation becomes so steady that it no longer stays contained inside you. It begins to register in others, even when nothing is said. They may not know what they're sensing, but they feel it. A subtle pressure, a calm intensity, a sense of being seen without being judged. Your presence starts speaking before your words ever do. This is not charisma in the usual sense. It's not confidence, performance, or personality. It's coherence. When your attention is not fragmented, when you are not leaking energy through constant reaction, something in you becomes solid. And people are extremely sensitive to that, even if they don't have language for it. You've probably experienced this from the other side, being near someone who says very little, yet somehow feels too present. You feel slightly more aware of yourself around them. Your thoughts slow or become louder. You notice your posture, your tone, your honesty. Nothing is demanded, yet something is activated. That reaction is not about them doing something to you. It's about your system responding to a lack of noise. When someone is fully present, there's nothing for your defenses to push against. No emotional hooks, no hidden agendas. Just awareness. And awareness tends to reveal whatever is already there. This can be deeply comforting or deeply uncomfortable, depending on what someone is carrying. Some people relax. They feel safe, grounded, less rushed. Others feel exposed. Their usual patterns don't land. Their stories don't get reinforced, and they don't know why. Your presence becomes a mirror without intention, not a cold mirror, but a clear one. People sense that they can't hide behind performance as easily, and this happens without judgment. In fact, the less judgment there is in you, the more powerful the effect. This is where many people get confused and pull back. They worry about being intimidating, distant, or misunderstood. But the discomfort others feel is not caused by you. It's caused by the contrast between awareness and automatic living. You're not creating tension. You're revealing it. When you observe deeply, your nervous system settles. Breath slows. Movements become simpler. Your eyes rest instead of scanning. All of this sends signals. Humans are wired to read these signals constantly. Long before words, we communicate through regulation. This is why children often gravitate towards someone who is quietly present. This is why animals respond to calm awareness. This is why some conversations become honest without effort. Your presence gives permission for reality to be felt rather than performed. But there's an important detail here. The moment you become aware of this effect and try to use it, it weakens. If you start thinking, people feel my presence, attention splits again. Observation turns into self-monitoring, and coherence fractures. Presence is not something you do to others. It's something that happens when you stop doing certain things internally, when you stop chasing reactions, when you stop needing validation, when you stop defending an image of yourself. Then what remains is felt. Some people will try to name it. They'll say you're calm, intense, grounded, mysterious. Others won't say anything, but they'll linger or pull away. Both responses are information, not something to manage. Your job is not to adjust your presence to make others comfortable. It's to remain honest in your observation. This can feel lonely at times. When you stop feeding the usual dynamics, certain connections change. Small talk feels thinner. Drama feels heavier. You may notice a growing distance between you and patterns that once felt normal. This is not superiority, it's sensitivity. And with sensitivity comes a new kind of responsibility. Not to fix others, but to stay awake inside yourself. Because the deeper your presence becomes, the more your inner state matters. Any unobserved tension, fear, or desire will also be felt. This is where the process turns inward in a more demanding way. External chaos may be quieter now, but internal noise starts to surface. The mind doesn't disappear. It becomes louder, more creative, more persuasive. It doesn't like being seen so clearly. Thoughts question this path. Emotions rise unexpectedly. Old habits look for ways back in. This is not failure. It's the system responding to loss of control. And if observation is to remain real, it has to include this resistance too, because the moment you stop observing internally, presence becomes performance. And that's when its power fades. Staying present when the mind pushes back is the next threshold. And it's there, in that internal confrontation, that observation stops being gentle and starts becoming unshakable. When observation deepens, something predictable happens. The mind resists. Not gently, not quietly, but with intensity. Thoughts become louder, doubts feel more convincing. Old patterns suddenly seem urgent again. This isn't a setback. It's a sign that observation has stopped being passive and has started to become power. The mind was never designed to like being observed. Its job is to interpret, predict, and control. When awareness turns toward it without interference, it feels exposed. It loses its position as the center. And like any system that senses loss of control, it pushes back. This resistance often shows up as distraction. You sit in stillness and suddenly remember unfinished tasks. You feel present, and then a strong emotional wave appears. You begin to observe, and the mind produces questions like, is this working, or am I doing this right? These are not innocent questions. They're strategies to pull attention back into activity. The mind equates movement with safety. If it keeps you thinking, analyzing, adjusting, it stays relevant. Observation threatens that relevance, because when you see thoughts instead of believing them, their authority weakens. The mind senses this shift immediately. This is where many people misinterpret what's happening. They assume the resistance means something is wrong, that they're regressing, that they should stop. In truth, the opposite is happening. The mind only resists when something real is changing. Comfort doesn't provoke defense. Loss of dominance does. What makes this stage difficult is that the mind doesn't attack directly. It uses familiar voices, practical concerns, reasonable doubts. It sounds like you. It borrows your language. That's why observation must be steady, not confrontational. If you argue with the mind, you strengthen it. If you suppress it, it goes underground. The only way through is to watch without reacting. This requires patience. The resistance may come in waves. Some days feel clear and quiet. Others feel crowded and restless. The mistake is expecting linear progress. Observation is not accumulation, it's availability. Each moment stands on its own. As resistance intensifies, you may notice physical sensations too. Tightness in the chest, shallow breathing, restlessness in the body. These are not obstacles. They're part of the mind-body system adjusting. Awareness includes them as well. Nothing is excluded. The mind may also try to spiritualize itself. It may turn observation into identity. I am someone who is aware. This is another defense. It preserves a sense of control by creating a new role. But true observation has no image attached to it. It's anonymous. It doesn't need recognition, even from yourself. This is where honesty becomes essential. Not brutal honesty, but gentle clarity. Seeing when attention slips, seeing when control returns. seeing when presence becomes performance. None of this requires correction, just noticing. The power of observation lies in consistency, not intensity. At this stage, you may feel a strange tension. On one side, life feels clearer, reactions are fewer, presence is stronger. On the other side, the mind feels more unstable. This contrast can be unsettling, but it's temporary. Systems reorganize when old hierarchies dissolve. The key is not to side with either. Don't side with the calm. Don't side with the chaos. Stay with the seeing itself. Observation is not something you use against the mind. It's the space in which the mind is allowed to be exactly what it is. As this continues, something unexpected happens. The mind begins to exhaust itself, not through force, but through lack of reinforcement. Thoughts arise, but they don't lead anywhere. Stories appear, but they don't hook attention. Gradually, the intensity drops. This doesn't mean the mind disappears. It means it returns to its proper function. A tool, not a ruler. A helper, not a master. But reaching this point requires passing through resistance without turning it into an enemy. And just when you think you understand this process, another subtle trap appears. The desire for visible results, the urge to measure change externally, to look for proof that reality is responding. This desire can quietly undo everything because it pulls attention out of observation and back into expectation. This is where many people stumble. They want the world to change before they fully change inside. They want confirmation before surrender. And this impatience brings us directly to the next challenge, where the unseen transformation is tested against the demand for immediate, visible outcomes. There is a quiet impatience that shows up just when observation begins to take root. It doesn't feel like impatience at first. It feels reasonable. You've been present. You've stayed aware. You've resisted reacting. And now the mind asks a simple question. Where are the results? This is where many people drift off course without realizing it. They start measuring progress by what they can see outside. Has the situation changed? Are people responding differently? Is life smoother now? And when the answers aren't immediate, doubt creeps in. The mind concludes that something must be missing. But invisible transformation always comes first. Reality reorganizes from the inside out, not the other way around. And the inside is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't provide instant proof. It changes the quality of perception before it changes the shape of events. The mind struggles with this because it trusts what it can measure. It wants confirmation. It wants reassurance. It wants something to point to and say, this is working. Observation offers none of that at first. It offers subtle shifts, less urgency, slightly more space. A calmer response that almost goes unnoticed. These changes don't feel impressive. In fact, they often feel disappointing. You expect clarity to feel dramatic. You expect presence to feel powerful. Instead, it feels ordinary. And that ordinariness makes the mind suspicious. So it starts checking. It scans reality for signs of improvement. It compares now to before. And the moment it does that, attention leaves observation and enters evaluation. Presence turns into monitoring, and monitoring reactivates control. This is not a failure of discipline. It's a misunderstanding of how change works at this level. The observer effect doesn't respond to demand. It responds to consistency. The more you look for results, the more you introduce pressure, and pressure distorts the signal. Think about how often you've rushed a process because you wanted proof. Conversations pushed too quickly, decisions forced before clarity arrived, emotional work abandoned because it didn't feel productive. In each case, impatience didn't speed things up. It fragmented them. Invisible transformation is not abstract. It's physiological. Your nervous system recalibrates. Stress patterns soften. Attention stabilizes. These shifts change how you meet situations long before situations change themselves. But because they don't look like success, they're easy to dismiss. This is why many people return to old habits. They don't trust what they can't see. They mistake quiet stability for stagnation. They assume that if nothing dramatic is happening, nothing is happening at all. Yet this is the exact moment where observation is doing its most important work. Beneath the surface, Reactions are losing momentum. Choices are becoming less automatic. You're no longer amplifying noise. Reality feels less hostile even if circumstances are unchanged. The universe, if you want to use that word, doesn't respond to what you want. It responds to what you are. And being takes time to settle. The demand for visible results is a demand for control to return. It's the mind saying, "I'll allow this if you prove it to me." Observation doesn't negotiate. The moment you try to bargain, it recedes. Not as punishment, but because awareness cannot coexist with impatience. They occupy different frequencies. This creates a subtle tension. Part of you knows something is shifting. Another part feels unsatisfied. The mind wants more, faster, clearer, and it tempts you to intervene, to speak, to act, to force movement. This is where trust becomes practical, not philosophical. Trust is not believing things will work out. Trust is staying present without requiring immediate validation. It's allowing change to remain unseen long enough to stabilize. Most people don't fail because observation is too difficult. They fail because they abandon it at the most critical point, right before the internal shift begins to reflect externally. And when you resist the urge to demand proof, something unexpected happens. Reality starts to move on its own terms. Not dramatically, not all at once, but unmistakably. Opportunities appear without being chased. Tension dissolves without confrontation. Things align without explanation. This is when another realization quietly emerges. The observer doesn't need to seek outcomes at all. In fact, the more you stop seeking, the more life seems to find you. And that inversion, where effort gives way to allowance, is where the deepest secret of observation begins to reveal itself. There is a quiet reversal that happens when observation matures. It doesn't arrive as an insight you can claim. It arrives as a relaxation you didn't plan. The observer stops seeking not because he understands everything, but because seeking no longer makes sense. And in that moment, something unexpected begins to move toward him. Seeking always assumes distance. It implies that what you're looking for is elsewhere, ahead of you, outside the present moment. Even spiritual seeking carries this tension, a constant leaning forward, a subtle dissatisfaction with what is. Observation dissolves that distance. When attention is fully here, there is nowhere to go. This is why the observer cannot be someone who chases. Chasing fractures attention. It pulls awareness out of the moment and stretches it toward imagined outcomes. And reality doesn't respond to imagination. It responds to presence. When seeking falls away, it's not because desire disappears. It's because desire no longer dominates attention. You still care. You still move. But there's no grasping, no internal leaning. The system settles into a state that feels complete even without answers. This completeness is not emotional fulfillment. It's structural. Attention stops scattering. Perception becomes wide and stable. And in that stability, life begins to approach you differently. Opportunities don't announce themselves with noise. They emerge quietly. A conversation opens without effort. A decision becomes obvious without analysis. A path reveals itself not because you searched harder, but because you stopped interfering. This is deeply counterintuitive in a culture built on pursuit. We're trained to believe that effort equals progress, that seeking equals seriousness, that stopping means giving up. But observation reveals a different order, one where clarity arises from availability, not force. The observer is found because he is visible, not outwardly but energetically. When attention is no longer cluttered with expectation, reality can register you. It's like tuning a signal. The clearer the frequency, the easier the connection. This doesn't mean sitting still and waiting. It means acting without internal tension, speaking without needing impact, listening without strategy. When you move this way, life meets you halfway, not as reward but as resonance. There's a subtle humility in this stage. You realize that much of what you chased before was driven by restlessness, not necessity. You were trying to escape discomfort, uncertainty, or silence. Observation shows that none of these needed to be solved. They needed to be seen. As seeking dissolves, time changes. Urgency fades. Patience deepens. You're no longer measuring progress in milestones. You're tracking alignment, and alignment doesn't rush. This can feel disorienting. Without the familiar push of desire, the mind wonders what's driving you now. The answer is simple but not dramatic. Clarity. You move because it's clear, not because you're afraid of standing still. At this point, reality starts offering feedback in small, precise ways. Not miracles, not dramatic transformations, subtle confirmations. Things line up with less resistance. Effort feels lighter. Even challenges feel cleaner. But this is also where a deeper surrender is required, because the more you experience this alignment, the more tempting it becomes to rely on it, to expect it, to seek it again. And expectation is just another form of seeking. The observer remains found only as long as he doesn't try to hold on to the experience of being found. The moment you try to preserve it, it slips. Not because it's fragile, but because it's alive. This is where silence becomes even more important. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of demand. When you don't ask reality to perform for you, it responds more freely. When you don't chase meaning, meaning emerges naturally. And yet, this surrender is often misunderstood. It's not passive. It requires strength to stay open without reaching, to remain present without grabbing, to trust without proof. As this trust deepens, something else becomes clear. Silence itself is no longer empty. It's dense with information. Answers arise without being asked. Direction appears without being planned. This is the point where many realize they were never meant to speak louder to life. They were meant to listen more deeply. And in that listening, another layer begins to unfold, one where silence reveals not absence, but an intelligence that has been responding all along. Silence has a bad reputation. Most people associate it with absence, with lack, with nothing happening. They hear the word and imagine emptiness, waiting or loss. But true silence is not empty at all. It is saturated with information. It is filled with answers that were always there, just never heard because the noise was too loud. When the mind stops reaching, when observation no longer seeks to control or achieve, something subtle becomes available. Not a voice, not a message in words. More like a knowing that doesn't argue with you. It arrives whole, complete, and it doesn't need explanation. This is difficult to trust because it doesn't announce itself dramatically. There's no thunder, no revelation. Often it feels like a simple shift, a sense of this way without reasoning, or a quiet not now without fear. Silence speaks in precision, not volume. Most of what you've been taught about guidance assumes it must be loud or emotional. A sign, a confirmation, a feeling strong enough to convince you. Silence works differently. It removes distortion rather than adding information. It clears the lens so reality can be seen as it is. When you stay quiet inside, you begin to notice things that were always present, the way a situation naturally wants to resolve, the timing that makes sense without forcing, the option that feels light rather than urgent. These are not thoughts you generate. They appear when the system is calm enough to receive them. Silence is where the nervous system finally relaxes its grip. Without constant interpretation, the body starts to register truth faster than the mind. You sense coherence or resistance before you can explain it. And that sensing is accurate because it's not filtered through expectation. This is why silence feels uncomfortable at first. It removes distraction. It exposes what's been ignored. Uncertainty, fear, unresolved questions. They surface when the noise drops. Many people mistake this discomfort for failure and rush back to thinking. But if you stay, the discomfort settles. What remains is clarity without tension. Silence doesn't give you everything at once. It reveals what you're ready to see. Sometimes that's an answer. Sometimes it's a deeper question. Both are forms of intelligence, and neither can be forced. This is also where humility returns. You realize how much you tried to speak to life instead of listening to it. How many times you pushed when waiting would have been wiser. How often you asked for direction while drowning out the response with urgency. Silence doesn't respond to demand. It responds to receptivity. The more you insist, the quieter it becomes. The more you soften, the clearer it feels. This is not punishment. It's alignment. In silence, you don't receive instructions. You receive orientation, a sense of where not to go, a sense of what no longer fits. And often that's enough to move correctly without needing a full map. This is where observation reaches its most refined form. You're not watching with effort. You're allowing perception to unfold. There's trust here, but not blind trust. It's experiential. You've seen that when you interfere less, things align more. And yet, silence is not an escape from life. It's an engagement with life without distortion. You still act. You still speak. But words come from clarity, not from noise. Actions arise from alignment, not from pressure. As this becomes familiar, reality feels responsive in a new way. Not because you control it, but because you're no longer blocking the response. The answers were always there, moving quietly beneath the surface of events. What changes is not the universe, it's your capacity to hear. And hearing at this level is not auditory, it's a full-body recognition, a knowing that doesn't shout. This is where many realize that they were never meant to fill silence with effort. Silence was meant to fill them. And when that happens, presence stops being a practice and becomes a way of moving through the world, awake, responsive, and grounded in something that doesn't need words to be real. Reality is not moved by how loud you are, how much you explain, or how hard you push. It shifts when you are here, fully, quietly, present. Noise tries to dominate life. Silent presence listens, and life responds. When you stop forcing outcomes, when you stop speaking over your own perception, reality begins to bend, not out of obligation, but out of resonance. This is not about becoming passive or distant from the world. It's about meeting the world without distortion. When your attention is steady, your choices become clear. When your mind settles, your actions carry weight. You don't need to announce change, you become it. If this reached you, write this sentence in the comments so I know you stayed until the end. I choose presence over noise. And if this way of seeing reality feels true to you, watch one of the videos appearing on the screen now. If you want more content like this, that's where the conversation continues.